Je me terre. De position.
Hello, you lucky people. What a week. Alright, housekeeping. I'm still waiting on my meds change, so, yeah, I might have to drop out of doing stuff for a few days when that happens, because changing medication is always a pain in the ass, so just don't worry if that happens. I've been trying to take it easy, which was the plan this year anyway, but events, dear boy, events continue to happen, so taking it easy is not necessarily particularly easy. Delegating is very hard for me to do. I'm a bit of an auteur as well as an autiste, I suppose, but I do have people writing a couple of adventures centered around Grimdark and Machinations that will come out at some point. And I have also farmed out some work to someone else doing some cultural background and so on Sengoku era Japan for my old school samurai game. Of course, the Red Room just put out Wretched Chanbara, so my timing is as great as always. I guess go and check that out, and then don't buy my game, I suppose. Yeah, chance to be a fine thing. If you're an old school gamer who likes using old school rules for modern stuff, go check out Victor's Old School Essentials modern material. He's got a Kickstarter going currently. You can find his channel as the Scrying Dutchman. While you're here, go sub to the OGGM, who does a good job summarising RPG news throughout the week, and we can forgive his stumbling over pronunciation and so on, because he does a good job, and it's part of the charm, to be honest. He was asking me how to get new subscribers, so me telling you to go and subscribe is a good way of doing that. Also, once again, I will beg you to go and subscribe excuse me, to the T-shirted historian, because he's closing in on those 1,000 subs and needs the boost. I've been trying to stay out of the sweet baby stuff, because my mental and physical resilience and my career resilience is not what it was back then. Of course, I hate all that, but it's making me stay out of it more than I would probably like to. But it is, it's deja vu all over again, isn't it? Except the conditions are different now. So, on to your comments. Speaking of Sweet Baby Inc., Mr. Triceratops says there's also the excuse me, added problem. There's also the added problem of fake work consultation and positions booming across all sectors, or bullshit jobs as they're also known. Fake work has always been a thing in the modern world and is seen under every kind of political system, but it's now gotten out of hand. In recent years, especially with more remote work, we have more people working in lazy, pointless jobs that are unnecessary yet pay decent salaries. A sensitivity reader isn't hard work. It's not like editing where you need to focus, but I've seen one firm charge $50 an hour for editing work and $200 an hour for sensitivity reading. I will charge $100 an hour for insensitivity reading to ensure that your work still has balls and is actually interesting. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is basically fake positions or papal indulgences or paying off extortionists, in effect. A lot of this stuff just isn't necessary, and with the crunch that seems to be making its way through a lot of businesses, a lot of media businesses, there seems to be a lot less money to throw away on this kind of thing. So maybe we're seeing something of an end to that. I think the only way it'll really be properly stopped is, unfortunately, with some sort of boycott, which I instinctively don't appreciate boycotts. I think we should make individual decisions, and organised boycotts are kind of bullshit, really. but I think that's what's going to be effective here. If you have 200, 300, 400, 500,000 hardcore gamers on Steam subscribed to that Sweet Baby Inc. list, that sends a very strong signal to companies that we don't want you to compromise your artistic vision. We don't want you to bring in these people. You know, we have enough problem with corporate sending you notes and making you do games as a service and all the rest of it. We don't need this bullshit sprinkled on top. And money talks, particularly at the moment when everything's under a squeeze. So that's the place to apply pressure. The Dave says, capitalism is the default setting for human beings because humanity is naturally greedy. Because I made some mention of capitalism in the thing. Humanity is naturally cooperative as much as it is naturally greedy. That is our species' superpower, our intelligence and our cooperation with one another, because by working together we can accomplish things that we could never accomplish alone. This is also the naturalistic fallacy, that because something is natural it is necessarily good or right or proper or better. I mean, fighting bears tooth and nail isn't going to get you very far, but that's how we'd have to do it naturally. At the very least, picking up a stick greatly increases your chances, but that's using a tool, which is unnatural. So I don't think arguing that this is how we are is the best way to go about things, because that's not a good argument. You know, we use tools in every other aspect of our lives, and social order, ideologies, social structures, these are also tools. So it doesn't have to be. We can be better, and arguably our default is not dog eat dog. Old School Gamer says, it was one of the most effective pro-censorship and pro-corporate agendas in history, talking about the response to Gamergate. Easy to call out their opponents as various ists and phobes because they were wearing the progressive skin suit. What they basically did was break other people's toys, then play the victim when called out on it. Yeah, we're seeing that again now. Bog standard bullies and authoritarians. The fact that you seem to be the only left-leaning person left talking from a pro-GG perspective is depressing. I'm completely black-pilled at this point. I want to die. No, you don't. I probably want to die more than you do, and I don't particularly want to die either. It is depressing, but these people aren't really on the left, but they have more purchase and more effect on the left. So I think a lot of old school left-leaning people are scared of talking about this sort of thing. A lot of old left-leaning, you know, gender egalitarians, race egalitarians, and so on, a lot of them are equally horrified. It's just they only tell you that shit in private, and that's annoying as fuck. I also think that since Gamergate, that a kind of parallel set of bullshit artists have risen up on YouTube and elsewhere. Not many of the original ones are really left, but you know, they grift out of calling everything woke without much consideration or thought necessarily going into it. And because this has been perceived as right-wing for so long, because they've labelled it as right-wing for so long, probably a lot more of it is reactionary now. But I think that just makes it more important, unfortunately, for me to speak up from a left-wing perspective and to red pill people on what left-wing ideology and philosophy actually is, and it's not that. Speaking of people who've been ideologically possessed and captured, Grognard Gaming says, another disastrous Trump presidency, because I mentioned that obliquely in the video. Everything was demonstrably better. Would you care to defend the Biden presidency? Here's an idea. Stay to politics in gaming and stay out of national politics, particularly when it's not your nation. I mean, what do you want? But I thought this was a gaming channel. I like it. I watch your videos. I don't watch political pundits defending a senile president. Your choice entirely, but many will make our own choices accordingly. I mean, why the fuck are you shocked, for one? I make no secret about being left-wing. If you were in any other country than the United States, or possibly Russia or China, I could see, stick to your own politics, blah, 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 blah. I could see that making sense. But when you're in America, which is such an economic, cultural and military powerhouse, what happens in the States affects the rest of us a great deal. And so if you fuck it by electing Trump again, that has an enormous impact on the rest of us around the world. I mean, just taking Ukraine, for example, Trump being on Putin's leash is not good news for Ukraine, and therefore not good news for the rest of Western Europe. Right, especially with him threatening to pull out of NATO and everything. Right? These things affect us. You may not like that truth, but it is truth. As to things being better under Trump, none of the economic indicators were better under Trump. I'm not particularly a fan of Biden or anything, but Trump bungled COVID, blew at least a $2 trillion hole in the US economy with handouts for people who were already rich and a small pittance for some of the middle class, tanked America's international reputation, was boldly and publicly corrupt. He is a civilly liable rapist. He has multiple convictions for fraud, tax evasion, and so on, misrepresentation. He's openly said he'll be a dictator, albeit only for a day or two, but, trust me, bro. Incited an insurrection against your country's democracy, is clearly senile, and yes, more energetic than Biden, but obviously more senile than Biden, and shows more symptoms of senility than Biden. We can't ignore the fact that he is thick as mince. Even his own wife hates him. For if he gets back in this time around, he's surrounded himself with Christian nationalists. So even if he wasn't a horrible bastard, the people around him are horrible bastards. And as he descends further into senility, they're likely to be the ones calling the shots. I mean, sure, other politicians are corrupt too, but not on his scale, and not so obviously and incompetently as Trump was and is. So, I mean, who outed themselves here again? Trump wasn't a fascist. That observation cost me some hysterical idiots who otherwise followed me and enjoyed my company on the left last time. This time I think he actually is a genuine threat and an authoritarian problem. Or if not him, those around him. But he's probably going to win because this is the worst timeline in the world ever in history. That feels better. Moving swiftly on. On the GM Advice video, Lepidoptera666 says, not sure what you mean by prescriptive, whatever, but we found it to be the one that liked it best, was best suited to be GM. Okay, so prescriptive is when it tells you how to play and it has a set way how to play. This is not necessarily bad. Paranoia does that, right? And that helps the comedy. It makes the comedy work in a lot of ways. You know you're going to have trouble getting your equipment. You know that the R&D equipment is going to be, at best, only tangentially useful, right? And probably deadly to use. But it's better if you do test the equipment. So, it works fine in that, and in some of the other games it can be useful. Like Convictor Drive, it helps structure the game into certain acts and so on, but I would chafe under that after a few games, I think. And then there's the people who tell you, you must use so-and-so safety tools or you're a bad person, or here's the 3-act structure, how your game should work, here's how to play, you're not welcome to play our game if you hold XYZ views, and so on, right? That's what I mean by prescriptive, telling you how to play. So Lepidoptera goes on. The rest of us are too mechanical. While some numpties think 4D roleplay is the purpose of games, we mostly focused on the game parts, which left the game with no soul. The one who could merge both was the GM for us. I guess that's the key to GM advice, how to take the mechanics, be able to use them without too much deviation so as to be confusing, while at the same time making a world that feels lived in. That way it's not just 4D improv from failed actors or machine precision of the mechanics that are so dry and an accountant as droll and boring as Diversity and Dragons could enjoy it. Bring life to the mechanics without it being a screenplay at a local theatre. That's the best advice GMs need. Yeah, that fusion of skills is probably a good thing to look at. I think it was the Basic Expert who did a video recently on how role-playing games are actually a collection of sub-games. I'm not sure I entirely agree, but it's good food for thought. Salsa Doom, which is a great name, says, I find the best DM advice and advice in general normally consists of shortcuts and how to round off the edges of a specific gaming system. Specificity, which is a difficult word to say, is the key. General advice tends to be formulaic. It makes you feel good, but in terms of application is close to useless. The art of war is the ultimate example of this. Have perfect intelligence, then act on it. Well, no shit, Sherlock. Yeah, but conveying shortcuts to people first requires that they have accomplished a certain amount of system mastery or have an idea of how to GM somewhat effectively, and then it's more about refining that and streamlining the process, I suppose. But everyone has their own style. The Dave says, becoming a good GM is a lot like sex. You have to suffer the embarrassment and awkwardness of your first time, then the rest becomes much easier. Yeah, I suppose that's true. You see, running a good game of Dungeons and Dragons is a lot like making love to a beautiful woman. User C Flick Turk says, ha, your raging leftism is sort of hoisting you by your own petard. The idea that the instruction manual of DM advice shouldn't instruct, prescribe, seems odd at best. The OSR jab also seems a bit odd, considering you can more or less see them struggling with this issue until they come out with the "'cause it's in the book, damn it" of 2nd edition. I say this as a DM who seeks to entertain with minimal prep, if any. You don't start there generally. YouTube is a great learning tool. Maybe you can finally make a good DM advice series, especially for the more charismatic types. Break them into manageable 8-minute chunks, 2 to 3 videos per principle, 1 explain, 1 demo. Get more people to run Amber for me. Okay, slightly selfish there. I don't really see what leftism has to do with it, unless it's my non-hierarchical damn the man save the empire contrarianness that you're referring to. But advice isn't the same as instruction, and you used the words interchangeably where I would not use them interchangeably. And I think instruct is different to prescribe. Like, when you learn to drive a car, right, there are rules of the road and there are requirements in how you interface with the car. You turn the wheel left, the car turns left. You turn the wheel right, the car turns right. But once you've got a hang on the rules of the road, you passed your test, everything else, then you're free to travel, albeit on roads for the most part, wherever you want, largely, right? So there's some prescription, but at the end of it, you can take that wherever you want, and that's how I would view instruction here. Or in education, at least once you get to higher education, it's much less about telling you dates and facts and so on, and much more about providing you with the tools to continue learning by yourself, right? Historical analysis, the scientific method, and so forth. And that's how I would view how instruction in RPGs should be. You know, here's how to do better at what you do, but there's no particular set way to do it, right? Okay. Bob McDowell says, I did a recap video on my channel similar to your RPG review vids, but about that specific live play episode. It got about 10% of the views the live play did. Yeah, well, I mean, as GMs, we're already like, what, 1/6 of the audience? And of those, how many people watch live play videos and then want to rewatch the live play videos with a recap blow by blow? Not many, I warrant, and your statistics would seem to bear that out. It's a problem because it's what would be useful, but there is no particular incentive structure to make that kind of video. Quick and Dirty Role Playing says, could you narrow down what the prescriptive formula for running story games is, or provide an example of a game that does what you speak of? From a player perspective, which you might be more familiar with, this is what I hate about Powered by the Apocalypse games, with their set moves and so on. And to a lesser extent, you'll have seen that when we were playing Candela Obscura, in that the capabilities that characters had were set but also too broad simultaneously. Or when we ran Convictor Drive, you know, that is divided out into little mission sections that you have to go through in order to get to the end. That's more of a cultural thing. That's a Japanese example of a prescriptive way to play. We will be playing Duty and Honor, the Napoleonic RPG, on Sunday, if enough people are interested to play. That also uses a mission-oriented system, which creates a very strict structure of play. But what I tend to mean more in these games like the Powered by the Apocalypse, you know, offshoots, is it's not just on the player side with the moves that it's incredibly prescriptive and restrictive. It also, the books tend to have this kind of hectoring tone on how you must play, how you must weigh and measure what the players do. Candela Obscura, that's one of the main flaws that many people have said about it, that it's constantly lecturing you. So that's what I mean, really. On Matthew Mercer's depression, Sinozoros says, I don't really get the hate for Critical Role in the first place. During Gamergate, the two big talking points were don't force us to change things we like because you're offended, and go make your own stuff. Mercer has been making his own stuff this whole time. Who am I to complain it is wrong or not like real role-playing? I have no interest ever watching Critical Role, but more power to him for doing it, and I expect he got a niche hobby this big. So, yeah, to an extent that's true, but he has created a level of unrealistic expectation in a lot of players and a lot of games masters, to the point where a lot of games masters give up, and a lot of players can be very vocal about not enjoying games that are perfectly good games but aren't living up to that Critical Role hype. It's not dissimilar to the politics issue. You know, we all have to take an interest in American politics because American politics influences, harms or helps the rest of the world to a large extent, and so it is with Critical Role. Where go Critical Role, the rest of us are then affected in their wake. So I would be fine with just letting them do their thing, but you also in Gamergate the point was it's okay to criticize. It's not okay to make shit up or to use your criticism to try and force someone or something to change, right? I think Critical Role's existence and manner encourages people to speak up about their own ways and means of doing things, and that's not bad, and criticizing Critical Role isn't bad, especially when you consider the effect that it has on the rest of us. Scott K. Filgo says, casual cruelty comes part and parcel with the anti-woke crowd. All the immature comments I've seen about Mercer's recent posts included hateful commentary about social justice. I mean, that's just chickens coming home to roost to a large extent. People who claim to be empathetic, lovely, helpful individuals who care about social justice have been, over the last decade or so, some of the cruelest, nastiest, least empathetic people you care to think of. So to a certain extent, hurt people. So when you've taken a lot of abuse, you will tend to lash out. So it's understandable, if not necessarily particularly excusable. But then the actions of the people now being snapped back at haven't been particularly excusable either. I also think that there's a misread going on here of edgy humour and snark, which is being taken as cruelty when it's not. It's a way of distancing and disempowering something that might otherwise harm you. Demolition Dude says, give fishing a try. Jeremy Wade mentioned that it's good for mental health. I recommend making sure people know you're going on a trip. I don't know about the UK. I do live in an area where venomous snakes are a thing. As you can tell, safety precautions. Yes, this is one of the big problems with admitting to having depression. Everyone wants to tell you their cure, whether it's lift bro or go fishing or whatever else, right? I know people mean to be helpful, and it's frightfully sweet of you, but just please don't do that. As for fishing, I would find it deathly dull, and I have a bit of a phobia of worms and maggots. So fishing, not so much for me. Maybe fly fishing, but I also don't particularly want to whip a hook into my own eye. So yeah, fishing's not for me. Plus all of our rivers are full of shit at the moment in the UK. So due to unscrupulous water companies dumping wastewater, which is a bit of a big deal here because we have like 90% of the chalk streams in the world and they're polluting them. But yeah, there you go. Conservative governments, lovely. Julio Gouveia says, Grim, I would recommend studying alchemy and hermeticism for depression. It helped me a lot. Yes, sequestering myself and diving into occult nonsense would certainly help, I'm sure. If it helped you, great. But I'm not you, and that has to be the weirdest recommendation I've had, I think. Going quite a ways back, on my Walking Dead review, R.L. Marin 1968 says, I get that you're a reviewer, in inverted commas for some reason, but how about when you offer a criticism, you offer how you would have done it to make it better? It's a bunch of I found this lacking, then nothing about how it could be better. Unfortunately, it just makes you sound like a complaining nagger. Well, that wasn't particularly helpful either. Was it? Follow your own advice. I think, and it's been quite a while since I did that review, but I think when I said I found this lacking at several points, it was because there wasn't enough material. So it would seem obvious to me that the solution would be to have more material in the areas in which said material was lacking, like when it came to complexity of survival hangouts, bases of operations, that sort of thing. So that is where I think I was with that, but it's so long ago now that I can't remember. On the Unknown Army's 3rd edition review, John K. Friday says sarcastically, thanks for reviewing this out-of-print game that you don't like. Very handy. Well, I mean, I think there's value in reviews of older games anyway, and I don't have a huge ego, but I think my insights into various games and their systems and backgrounds and so on is useful and interesting for people. As to the game, it is not out of print. You can still get it. So, should you still want to get it after my review, you can. So, I mean, what are you whining about? Aaron the Relentless left me a long comment, so strap yourselves in. I was a member of the Over the Edge Kickstarter and cancelled my pledge after seeing the first playtest documents. I think a fundamental lack of playtesting permeates the hobby. The game smacks of this mechanic should work and not any actual play experience. Usually when you're at the point of a Kickstarter there is no turning back on the design front, so I let the campaign go. There's also, in my humble opinion, a limit to the amount of good ideas people have. I think Tweet and Stoles have met their limit. They produced really good games in the 90s. They were, of course, tapped for revisions, but they haven't done a lot with these systems since the 90s. They really had no business revising them. But apparently you can't sell the same game over and over unless you're Chaosium. All good in games. I'd like to see a full colour, like all the Kickstarter money went into art, Smithsonian hardbound ribbon bookmark re-layout revision of Over the Edge 2nd edition, with no systemic revision whatsoever. Over the Edge 2E kind of screams for the current art punk fad of garish colours and art incorporated with text. They could easily turn the 240-page book from 1997 into some tantalising 400-page monstrosity with no added text. There's also something to be said about the normal plot of how revisions of games usually go. First edition, pure artistic vision, but not quite sure what we're doing though. Enthusiasm without excellence. Second edition, after feedback, fixing what went wrong with the first edition. This is usually the cleanest, best rendition of a given game system. Third edition and beyond, overthinking a game and muddying the waters with said overthinking, literally trying to fix what isn't broken. N+1 edition, figuring out that mistakes were made over several iterations, and bending back towards second edition, perhaps keeping some stuff from along the way, but not much. Not every game follows this path, but enough do that it's definitely a thing. Most games simply shouldn't go past second edition. I concur, and I believe I've said so at length on this channel multiple times, that if you want to get into a game and really see what it's about and get enthusiastic for it, get the first edition. If you want the most playable edition, get the second edition, and then after that, meh. Banjo6 says, is there a small resistance against radical simplicity going on right now? Hear the voices against that part of the OSR more often lately, and even the latest version of the Crunch Behemoth Rollmaster sells quite well. I think we've learned most of what there is to know from that movement myself. Yeah, and there's Adventurer Conqueror King as well. Macrease is very into his crunch, so I don't know that there's a lot of resistance, but I think there's definitely a small resistance. There's a sort of unsatisfying nature to radically simple games, and the lack of character development and so on. Though the idea of longer campaigns also seems to have been under assault for many years, and not many people seem to be able to keep things going for that long, so maybe that's part of it. On the Uncensored Kinks and Cantrips review. Okay, here we go. Kuru, which is also the name of a degenerative brain disease caused by cannibalism, just saying, says, you are calling bestiality and paedophilia interesting philosophical issues. You are a sick man. I and others have reported your video, you disgusting and vile person. No. Right, so the question was, in a world of magic, wherein people can shapeshift, or in a world of technology, where an adult and fully developed intelligence could potentially be placed into a body that is more like that of an animal, or more like that of a child, or more like something completely alien, like a tentacle monster or whatever. Where are these lines where you can genuinely call something bestiality and paedophilia? If someone wants to transform themselves through cybernetics into an underage shape, shall we say, and then engage in sexual activity, can we say that's wrong? You know, these are interesting ideas and issues around transhumanism when it comes to cyberpunk. and in the sordid underbelly of fantasy worlds as well. So yeah, this is interesting philosophical transhuman kind of issues, and we have some inkling of that in real life now. That guy who was making child sex dolls to try and get paedophiles not to engage in their practices recently, I believe, put out a dog sex doll, right? So, I mean, it's not actually an animal any more than the doll was actually a child, and these things may prevent people from indulging. So isn't there some value in that? You see the same arguments and issues about lolicon or shota. These are drawings, not people. But a lot of people have this visceral gut reaction, the same that you do. But if you actually stop and philosophically think about these things, right, it's interesting. And these are the kind of things that fiction often wrestles with. If all men were brothers, would you let one marry your sister? Is a great science fiction story about incest, for example, asking the question, in a world of contraception and abortion, does it really make sense that we have this enormous social pressure not to do these sorts of things? Because the consequences in breeding don't have to happen, right? It's an interesting, fascinating story and philosophically engaging, I think. And being philosophically engaged by these ideas doesn't make you a zoophile or a paedophile. Weird person. Kuru goes on to say that being attracted to someone who looks like a child is by definition paedophilia. If you don't think paedophilia is inherently wrong, then that's your problem. Well, I would disagree. I think being attracted to someone who is a child is by definition paedophilia. There's a real-life example of this. There's a travel blogger called Dan Swaggart, who was dating a reality star called Shauna Ray, who has conditions that basically make her look like a child, like the size of an 8-year-old child, but she is actually an adult. So this isn't entirely academic. There are people in romantic and sexual relationships, or who were in romantic and sexual relationships, who are dealing with this today. Do you think he's sick and bad and wrong? Apparently he got a lot of abuse over it, but doesn't she deserve love? Yeah, these are interesting questions and ideas, and if we just knee-jerk, we never think about them, and we never have that intellectual discussion about these things. JJ says, I really enjoyed nymphology back in the day. Always wanted a bit more than was in the book, or than what was in the book, though. My group had a few players that were too uncomfortable with it to allow it to see play, but I loved it nonetheless. So it's nice to meet you today, sir. Well, lovely to meet you. There was a big campaign set in a magical university using that book that was run online somewhere back in the day. So people were using it, but it was never actually intended for use. But there you go. Gorilla, DK, which presumably stands for Donkey Kong. So when I was talking about how the queerness gives a certain amount of protection to these products, I took exception to that. Protection, what planet are you living on? There are several states in the US where books are getting pulled out of school libraries for even insinuating there exist other sexualities than straight. Some people are going completely off the rails if they hear a couple of drag queens are going to read H.C. Andersen for kids at the local library while dressed up as figures from the stories. A former model and author of children, well, you get the idea, right? So cherry picking all these examples, but the US is not the world, right? And if you're selling a sexualized product through Kickstarter or on Amazon or whatever, you definitely do get some indulgence and some protection if it's queer oriented, because the public relations blowback for them if they ban such a product is much higher than if it was a heterosexually oriented sexual product. Right? So, like it or not, there is protection. I agree all of this other shit is bad as well, but it doesn't happen everywhere in the world, and it doesn't interface with the subject that we're talking about here, which is the publication of sexualized gaming material or normal material. And in those examples, due to woke washing of various companies, being queer is protection, is help. It's a way of avoiding the problems that more heterosexually oriented sexualized material suffers. So both of these things can be true at the same time. We live in the worst of all possible worlds. Karen Swanee says, no one needs a straight Pride Day, and the only reason we can do Pride at all is because it's a way we live. But now, even within our community, we're seeing bans on sexy costumes and the idea of sex during Pride, because what about the children? You're correct about let's celebrate healthy sexuality. The world will be better all around. Well, that's what I mean when I say straight Pride Day. It would be lovely to have a time when heterosexual attraction and so on could be celebrated the same way queer attraction is during pride parades and so on. As it's a way we live, that's true for a lot of heterosexual people as well. Sex workers, adult workers, lots of people, strippers. The word is escaping me, but there's all kinds of other things. All right, so I don't this instantly negative reaction from people who presumably are queer to this idea seems just as silly to me as the knee-jerk reaction of Kuru above. That it's just not thinking it through. User C Flick Turk says hetero pride goes straight to stripper floats in your mind. No agrarian pastoral mothers and babies. You might have to look at yourself for the ick about the queer coating there a little. It's not an ick, it's annoyance, right? The double standard. Hypocrisy really, really scratches my face. It really does. And I don't think agrarian pastoral mothers and babies is hetero pride about sexuality. That's consequences of sexuality. And finally, on the Kalergi plan, I know you all look forward to this every time. Ex Umbra says, don't believe in this reality happening right before your eyes, says the Jew with a Baphomet emblem. I mean, tell on yourself. I occasionally sneak occult symbolism into my videos because I know it drives conspiracy theorists nuts. I am not Jewish, but even with the current issues of the day, I wouldn't have a problem with being Jewish, but I'm not. And you just tell on yourself when you do that kind of thing. As to this reality happening right before our eyes, show me the plan in the book, then demonstrate that it's being executed, because I have no idea what you're talking about when you say this is happening right before your eyes. Morons. Cody Sparks says, this video probably has a lot of dislikes. I wonder why. It's because retards hunt in packs. Double Check says, you have to be one of the biggest losers that ever walked this earth. Imagine having to sit here and refute everyone in the comments. What a fucking shit cunt you are. Imagine being one of these losers in the comments who believes nonsense for no reason, and despite there being legions of you, not a single one of you has ever offered the slightest inkling, the slightest scintilla, the slightest fragment of evidence that this plan is a real or genuine thing. Yeah, I will salve my bruised conscience and ego from your cutting insult by the fact that at least I'm not a racist cunt. Zang. In his house in R'lyeh, great Cthulhu lies dreaming.
and when he awakens, he shall have the morning wood of aeons. Call of Cthulhu is a deeply pornographic card game. Enjoy your tentacles.